This is typically where I give the little option pitch to Mallory, our producer, in the other side for the Spotlight games.
All right, y'all, we're going to start off real strong this week, and Craven's actually going to be at this game. So let's get into it. Number 4 Texas traveling to Ann Arbor this Saturday to take on number 9 Michigan in the Big House. Saturday, September 7th at 11 a.m. You can watch it on Fox. Texas coming into this game as 7-point favorites of right now. The over-under is 44.5. And it's funny, Ishna, you and I were at the hashtag sports conference last June or July when this game was announced. Mm-hmm. And at that time, if you would have asked me, is this going to be a good game? I probably would have said, no, because this was before we really knew what Texas was going to be last year. And we, experts had Michigan probably winning the national championship, which they, of course, went on to do. Now my perspective of this game has completely flipped. Mm-hmm. And Craven, I'm going to hand it off to you. You're going to actually be at this game. It just feels like to me that Texas is in full control of this game.
Yeah, styles make fights. In boxing, I think that's true in football as well. For Michigan, this feels like a bad matchup, which, to Mallory's point, if we rewind a few years, it would have looked the other way. Texas has gotten so much better in the trenches. I think their improvements along the offensive line, their improvements along the defensive line will help them mitigate the only thing Michigan can really bring to this game, and that's dominance in the trenches. They're not going to be able to dominate Texas in that way. I don't think they're explosive enough offensively to really scare the secondary, which would be my concern about Texas. I'd be much more concerned, if this was a Michigan team that had a bunch of wide receivers and a great quarterback and could throw it all around the yard. They're going to try to establish a physical dominance against Texas. I just don't know if they can do that. So I kind of lean your way. Watching Texas win at Alabama last year kind of made me not worry so much about how they can handle, kind of a road environment in a big game. It's going to be a big game. It's going to be an early game. So it's going to be a tough test for Texas, but I do think that they're set up to win this one.
And I don't know if you guys watched the Fresno State Michigan game last week. You saw a little bit of it. I just personally don't think Michigan looked very good. And it was just, I don't know. It was just one of those games. Donovan Edwards, their star player, right? Carried the ball for, in theory, he carried the ball for 11. He had 11 carries for like 27 yards. Yeah. Was it one of those things where then they had that they threw two quarterbacks in, and Alex Orji, who shot up to Saxey, and then Devin Warren, I believe his name was Davis Warren.
Get the disrespect.
They threw both of those quarterbacks in the first drive of the entire game, and it just felt like to me. And in this game, guys, you got to remember that this Fresno State Michigan game was a 6-point game heading into the fourth quarter. This was not a, hey, let's not kind of show all of our cards because I know we got a big game against Texas next week. I think this is a, hey, we really got to figure this out before Texas. It just feels like to me that this Michigan team is not nearly as strong as they were last year.
Carter is terrified of this game.
Well, this might be dumb, but I think Texas looked too good versus Colorado State, and Michigan looked so bad that it's going to be a role reversal. You remember last year, Texas in the season opener did not look solid against Rice, looked very shaky, and then they went out and dog-walked Alabama basically on their home turf. This is just maybe the lifelong, watching Texas kind of falter, and this is a different Texas team, but it makes me a little nervous going into this game.
Yeah. I'll say this, right? I think that you have something with Michigan. I don't think Michigan's as bad as they looked, but I do think they have things to work out, right? I think the 2 quarterback thing, I think a lot of people may have, including us, may have thought Alex Orji was kind of the guy.
Dude, if you thought Jalen Milroe was bad last year, wait for Alex Orji this week.
I think they're just trying to figure out what they want. Like, do they want Alex Orji's mobility?
No one clipped that, by the way.
Yeah, no, right. Nobody clipped that. Or do they want Davis Warren's steadiness? I don't know, because, I was watching the game, and I think Alex on Split Zone Duo mentioned this. It was like, last year we saw J.J. McCarthy, and you were like, oh, are they keeping, some safety reins on him? And I think, for the most part, yeah. He was just running the offense. Last week, it looked like they were just throwing short because they could not trust Davis Warren to throw deep. Yeah. And they had no options to throw deep. By the way, shout out Raylan Sharp. Do you remember him from Allen? He was a receiver that caught a touchdown against Fresno State. Yeah, he was, I think his nickname was Lil Kyler because he was the quarterback a couple years after Kyler. So, shout out Raylan Sharp. He had a great touchdown against Michigan. it didn't feel like the Michigan that I'm used to, where it's just like Craven said, dominate the trenches, establish running game, and then build outside of that. Which, of course, with the guys like Blake Corum last year, you would expect Donovan Edwards to be that guy.
Be that step-up guy, yeah.
I feel like this is going to be, again, maybe to Carter's detriment, a game where Texas is able to – where I'm going to expect Texas, at least the Texas that I saw on Saturday, to come out and pop them in the mouth early, maybe go deep on a couple throws, and then just kind of silence the big house early on. Craven, I don't know what kind of start you're expecting from this one.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to figure out kind of concerns about the Texas running game and just what that offensive line really is, kind of if they miss C.J. Baxter as much as maybe we think that they would. The offensive line didn't dominate Colorado State in a way that maybe we thought they would on paper. And so, Michigan's going to be one of the better defensive lines they face this year, probably the best secondary they're going to face. And so, we'll see what the wide receivers look like. If Quinn Ewers can have the type of game he had last year on the road against Alabama. Ewers has kind of stepped up into these moments pretty well. Like in the big games, he's played good over the last couple of years since he's been at Texas. So I don't worry too much, about his ability to handle the crowd. They've played in a Sugar Bowl. They've played at Alabama. They played in the Big 12 championship. I think it's time that we just kind of assume this is what Texas is. And that's not to say they can't lose this game. This is still a Michigan team with a really good defense. A couple turnovers happen. A couple special teams plays happen. The Wolverines can win this. But if I'm Texas, you can feel about as comfortable as you could going on the road to the Big House in week 2, just because I think that they've handled everything Michigan can throw at them pretty well, and I'm not too worried about the quarterback position.
Oh, I totally agree with that, Craven. When we watched Quinn Ewers at Bryant-Denny Stadium last year, his blood pressure did not rise like 1 point at all. He looked calm, cool, collected. But here's my read on this Texas game against Michigan, is that they seemingly answered a lot of questions against Colorado State. Like, hey, the running game looks really good with Jaden Blue. The pass defense was much improved, holding Braden Fowler-Nicolosi to 74 yards. And oh, by the way, the red zone offense went 7 for 7 with 7 touchdowns. But it's basically like I built a deck, and I had my toddler get on the deck, and it's like, oh, that's sturdy. And now a 200-pound man is going to be jumping on that deck, and we're going to be double-checked now and say, hey, did you really make the improvement, or did you just do it for 1 week against a Mountain West team?
Sure. All right, Mallory, what do we got next?
All right, coming up next, let's go Texas Tech playing at Washington State this Saturday at 9 p.m., another late kick. Can watch it on Fox. Texas Tech coming in to this game as 1.5-point favorites. The over-under is 65.5. Watching the game last week, there are quite a few concerns about the secondary.
Update from Lubbock. Comments are turned off on the YouTube press conferences right now.
That tells you all you need to know, I think, heading into this game. Bad secondary for Texas Tech. Washington State, what are they really good at? Oh, throwing the ball. They put up 500 passing yards in their game last week. Craven, what are you looking for in this game, and are you concerned about this Texas Tech secondary as well?
One of the things I would caution everyone listening, watching, would be to overreact to week 1. From a gambling standpoint, you always want to react to the overreaction. Like what you thought for 9 months is probably more true than what you saw in one simple game sample. And this goes for any team, good or bad. Like there's going to be a lot of teams that played great in week 1 that you look at in week 2 and you're like, oh, that's kind of more what we thought it was going to look like. And there's going to be a lot of teams in week 2 that play much better than they did in week 1. And it goes, oh, that's kind of the team we thought that they were going to. I think Tech is probably going to be in that latter category. Like I think if you would have asked us all a couple of weeks ago, we would have said they're going to go into Pullman and kind of roll a Washington State team that's kind of rudderless right now, without a conference, without any real star players. Their best player last year is probably the best wide receiver for Tech right now in Josh Kelly. And so I think this is one that a bad first game doesn't look good. I don't think this Tech team is great. I don't think they're going to win 9 or 10 and go win a Big 12 or anything like that. But I think they're better than what they showed in week 1. I think they'll be a little bit healthier in the secondary in week 1. They'll turn that kind of stuff around. I really like this offense. I think the Tech offense has really turned a corner, is going to be balanced. And, Taj Brooks, along with those wide receivers, going to be really good. I don't have as much concern about Tech as I think a lot of people do, just because I'm going to wait for more sample size before we throw out everything we thought about this team going into the season.
Yeah, I'm a believer in Tim DeRuyter. Again, bad showing, right? It might have just been one of those nightmare scenarios that we, come back and look back on and say, oh, that was weird. But also, I think the one thing you can probably take from that game is the continuing bad starts for Texas Tech, right? Early in the season, we saw them last year, obviously against Wyoming. They didn't have enough to end up winning that game. This one they did, again, needed some help, right? Of course, I mentioned on the recap pod, like Maverick McIver kind of like flustered in the pocket and kind of missed that crossing route on the 2-point conversion. But regardless, they did enough on their end, Texas Tech, to pull out that win. By the way, shout out Texas connection on Washington State starting quarterback John Mateer.
Little Elm, shout out.
Little Elm, yeah, exactly. Threw, like Mallory mentioned, threw for 350 yards last week. That's what they like to do. In a way, it's very funny that Tech gets Abilene Christian, Washington State, and then North Texas back to back to open. So it's like, okay, is that secondary broken? Or, hey, guess what? Are they just going to have to weather the storm against these teams that throw caution to the wind and throw the ball no matter what?
I think the silver lining in this is it wasn't indicative in the entire 11-man defense for Texas Tech. You could really pinpoint it on the defensive secondary and the lack of communication. It wasn't like, oh, the defensive line's getting gashed. They let a few big runs pop. For the most part, they held them to 3 yards a carry. It wasn't like the linebackers were outgunned and outmanned out there. They're still two of the strongest in the Big 12.
Sure.
But the defensive secondary needs to get it fixed fast because, like you mentioned, they're going up against two coordinators from the Mike Leach coaching tree now in Washington State's Ben Arbuckle and then Eric Morris at North Texas. So Washington State this upcoming week, John Mateer, shout out Little Elm. Also, their wide receivers, Kyle Williams and Chris Hudson, both had over 100 yards, and they've been clocked in the top 15 in terms of players in 20-mile-per-hour games. So they're both burners.
Nice. Well, and here's the thing about Washington State, too, is that you've got to remember they're coming from a Power 4 conference dropping down to a G5. They're only playing 2 Power 4 teams this year. That's this week, Texas Tech, and then they've got Washington. The rest are G5. So in their minds, they're like, hey, if we want to make the college football playoff, we got to win out in conference play.
They need this game for the Pac-12
They need this game because they're probably not going to beat Washington next week. So this is their lock-in Power 4 win of the season in Texas Tech. So if they can, win out and then maybe have one loss to Washington, that's a pretty good resume to, it's good for them because the committee will say, hey, you got one Power 4 win, great in conference play, you might be in the college football playoff.
Sure, yeah, the margin for error is a lot smaller.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, for Tech, I'm worried more about the injury.
Someone cut his mic.
Do we lose Craven again?
Someone from Lubbock cut his mic.
Yeah, no
I was about to talk about the injuries. I think what he's going to talk about, though, is Taj Brooks is injured now because he had to have 27 carries against Abilene Christian to win that football game, and now you don't have him for Washington State, which is very concerning now. Yeah. I know everyone's very high on Cam Dickey from Austin Crockett, and they do like Cameron Valdez, but you're talking about Taj time in Lubbock is already clock's ticking.
I was about to say Taj time's in overtime right now because they're going to need him all of his durability.
We got Craven back, by the way.
We got Craven. Yeah, what were you going to say about the interior or injuries? I think it was something before you got cut off.
Yeah, just the secondary is going to be on an island because they've had so many injuries on the edge. They're probably not going to get the pass rush we thought going into the year, and it's going to be up to that secondary to get healthy and to play better.
Yep. All right, Mallory, what's next?
All right. Our third spotlight game of the week. Baylor traveling to play number 12 Utah this Saturday at 2:30 p.m. You can watch it on Fox. Utah coming into this game as 14-point favorites as of right now. The over-under 53.5. We get to see Cam Rising. Yes. I'm really excited. This Cam Rising, this really stout offense against Baylor's defense. Craven, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I still think Baylor is a double-digit or underdog for a reason here. I mean, they looked really good last week. That's why I moved them up in the power poll. I thought DeQuan Finn looked good. His legs are going to give a dimension to this offense that they haven't had before. It was interesting seeing Jake Spavital run so many RPOs. It's not something he's done in that way for a long time. The defense looked good, with Aranda calling plays, but the business is about to pick up, right? Like Utah is a lot better football team. We'll learn more about the Baylor Bears this week.
Can we do my favorite segment of the week, Dave Aranda press conference clips?
Okay, what we got?
This is from Eric Kelly on Twitter. Dave Aranda on being a play caller, defensive play caller. It's like you're a fighter pilot and you've got this jet, but there's people that want to kill you. You get to fly it, but you don't want to die. I feel that all the time. And then later, he says, we're going to have to win some games so that we can be cool enough to hang out with. Well, Dave Aranda, here's a start. You beat Utah, the number 12 team in college football. You're going to have some guys sitting at your table. But it is really the first test for Dave Aranda as defensive play caller because Cam Rising has his football doctorate as a seventh-year senior.
Yeah, look, with this Utah team, one of the favorites in the Big 12, it's going to depend on him staying healthy. Obviously, that's kind of been the linchpin, honestly, since he's been there. But looking at Baylor, they did look really good offensively. Of course, it was against Tarleton. But again, this is a Tarleton team that is a ranked FCS team that looked pretty good in week 0. So, like, it wasn't a bottom feeder FCS team. And we saw Baylor struggle against Long Island last year, right? So, like, I'm looking for things that I could take from that game and say, okay, here's what I can see translate. It was Daquan Finn, like Craven said. It was Jake Spavital's play calling. A little bit different of a Jake Spavital, somebody who comes from the air raid tree, but like he mentioned, added a little bit more RPOs last week. Whether that was because somebody like Daquan Finn is maybe more adept at that kind of stuff, we'll see. I would like to see a little bit more from the run game in this one. I think that'll be something because when you have Utah, who's gonna look to control the clock and keep that offense off the field, I think you're gonna have to be able to have some jabs of your own in that aspect, right? You probably don't want to be able to just kind of. I'm not saying they're necessarily a turbo NASCAR offense, but you get what I'm saying, right? You want to be able to control the clock a little bit as well on your side. So again, they are, like Craven said, they are a double-digit underdog for a reason. I mean, Kyle Whittingham is I think he's, even though in his last season, he's still somebody who's one of the longer tenured coaches in the country for a reason. Baylor's on their 4th head coach in like 5, 7, 8-ish years roughly. Mm-hmm. So like this is still a good kind of juxtaposition, I guess, of stability versus constant instability when you look at not even just the head coach, but everything behind the scenes as well for Baylor.
Here's a question I have for the group, though. Is it a blessing or a curse for Baylor that they're playing Utah, a Big 12 conference team, as a non-conference opponent? Because I keep going back and forth on this. Would you rather wait to see Utah in conference play or get them out of the way so you don't have to see them in conference play and it doesn't go on your Big 12 football record?
I don't think it matters. It's not like Baylor's in a team that's probably in contention to make the playoffs. So I don't think it. I think it's half dozen one hand, 6 dozen on the other.
Yeah. All right. So we had one more spotlight game, but we had
2 more spotlight.
Two more spotlight games. Before we move on, though, we did mention that Tech is away this week at Washington State. Last week, they were in Lubbock, of course, for their home opener against ACU. I want to give a shout out to our friends at Visit Lubbock. Every month, Craven will have one spotlight game for Lubbock, or for Texas Tech. He'll have a special preview written for our friends at Visit Lubbock and Lubbock Sports. Go read up, or you'll read next month's preview on TexasFootball.com. Please visit TexasFootball.com and visit Lubbock Sports if you are in town for a Texas Tech game. They have you covered as far as events, all that stuff. Matt Stepp has high school previews as well for teams, for games going on in Lubbock. There was a really good one last week, and typically he's very adept at finding the niche, even the mainstream appeal of a lot of games going in and around the 806 South Plains area. All right, Mallory, let's go on to our next spotlight game.
SMU hosting BYU this Friday, September 6th at 6 p.m. You can watch it on ESPN2. SMU coming into this game as 11-point favorites. The over-under 55.5. This is SMU's first big test, I feel like, this year. Nevada, of course, was a good test week 1, but this is their first Power 4 opponent that they are going to face. And, man, those red uniforms that they unveiled yesterday.
Oh, so sick.
So sick. I am excited to see those in action. Craven, what do you think?
Yeah, I guess for SMU, for me, it's just the quarterback rotation and what that's going to look like. I always assumed the first 2 weeks were going to play those guys as much as you could, kind of, grade them behind the scenes and pick a guy to move forward with. It's starting to get to that point of the season where you need to pick somebody, or at least I feel, unless they want to do the 2 quarterback thing. Throughout the year, they got BYU this week and then TCU, then Florida State. And so, this is kind of the meat of the schedule for the Mustangs. They've been better running the football. I thought Brashad Smith has been, one of the better transfer portal additions so far this season for a team in the state. He's been really good. He's become number 1 running back on the Hilltop. So it's not just a pass-happy team, but it does feel like picking a quarterback, sticking with the quarterback, and letting them kind of, live and die, right? Like, Jeff Traylor talks about in our interview in a little bit. You don't want a guy looking over the sidelines, and every time you incomplete a pass or have a punt, you don't know if you're going to keep your job. Quarterbacks can be, fragile in that kind of way. So for me, what I'm looking at in this game is, one, how does SMU handle the trenches? That's going to be their big adjustment in P4 football. And then secondly, just kind of what does the quarterback rotation look like if there is still a quarterback rotation?
Now, Rhett Lashley did say Preston Stone is the starter, but we will see Kevin Jennings playing. What they've seemed to have done in the first 2 weeks is they rotate for the first 2 drives, like Preston Stone gets 2, Kevin Jennings gets 2, and then they kind of pick one to go throughout the game. Mm-hmm. It felt like Kevin Jennings got the nod versus Houston Christian, but of course that's when mostly backups were playing.
Yeah.
This is your first game against what's going to be 10 consecutive Power 4 opponents.
Yeah.
So whoever performs better in this game, it feels like they're going to have the leg up for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that in theory, I get what you mean, right? Like, you can't decide a quarterback in one drive, so you give him another one, maybe get in rhythm, and then you kind of, go from there. I just think that Kevin, I think the phrasing better would be, or maybe in practice, it would better be phrased as, I should say, Kevin Jennings could be prepared to play, right? Like, you go in with Preston Stone, give him a good couple drives, and if it's like 3 and out, hey, okay, then maybe you do something. But like, as we saw in week 1 against Nevada, it's like Kevin Jennings went down and scored, and then we didn't see him again, right? And it was like, I was like, okay, well, what's the rhythm there? What is exactly the thought process behind that? I feel like they think that Preston Stone is the guy, but I think I don't know if they're afraid of just outright saying it, or the fact that they don't want maybe they do find something interesting that Kevin Jennings does that they don't want to eliminate from the offense. I don't know, but it does feel like, he started, right? Preston Stone has started these games.
Both games. And they said he earned the right to be the starter for the first 2 drives.
Right, exactly. And so it's like, okay, well, then name him the starter. Because if it's another Nevada game, another start to the game like Nevada, okay, BYU is good enough to just potentially run away with that game, right? So that's where I'm a little confused on. I think, to Craven's point, I think a lot of the other questions I had were answered. And obviously it's Houston Christian, so, take a grain of salt. But regardless, they cleaned up a lot. The running game was better. Obviously the defense was a lot better. But it's still that one thing that could grow into a bigger thing if it. Also, when's the point where they stop, right? Is it week 5 where it's just like, okay, cool, Preston Stone? Or is it just like something that they just keep kind of going through until...
Well, at this point, they can keep rotating quarterbacks through Florida State. Okay, that's the last one, I swear. I'm done after this one.
And the other thing about this is, SMU hasn't beat a P4 opponent outside of TCU in a long time.
That's a good
right. Like they haven't won these football games. Beating BYU, I think, would get that kind of monkey off their back and kind of allow some confidence to kind of flow through this football team going into the TCU, Florida State, Louisville trio.
Yeah, they haven't won a home game against a Power 4 opponent since 2010.
God, that's crazy.
Jeez,
you're about to see 5 of them.
All right, so. Yeah, I don't know, man. That one's gonna be very interesting to see, just because I don't know how much they can keep the yo-yo.
Man, I think whoever you see in the stretch run of this game when it's nut cutting time is gonna be the guy.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's the way. Anyway, whatever. We can go on. We can have a whole podcast.
Yeah, we're on a circle right now.
The confusing
brain
nature
pretzel
of this quarterback battle. All right, Mallory, we have one more spotlight game.
Let's go ahead and get into it. Our last spotlight game. UTSA traveling to play Texas State this Saturday at 3 p.m. You can watch it on ESPNU. Texas State heading into this game as 2-point favorites. The over-under, it's going to be pointsy, 61.5. It's the Fighting Mike Cravens versus the Fighting Ishmael Johnsons. Craven, I am still really disappointed. How dare you choose Michigan, Texas over what feels like Texas's Super Bowl in Texas State and UTSA?
Yeah, I'm going to have some FOMO come 3 p.m. On Saturday. I've already planned to just kind of stay in the big house press box and just kind of watch that by myself, which is probably the best way to do it. I saw a crazy stat today floating around on Twitter. UTSA and Texas State have played 20 quarters and 2 overtime periods. Texas State has led for a total of 25 seconds in that time. And so this has been a one-sided rivalry, if we call it that right now. But I think this game's going to be one of the better ones, right? This is probably the best matchup so far, both with huge G5 playoff implications now that one is guaranteed a spot, and the loser of this one's probably eliminated from that. And so kind of an elimination game in week 2, a regional rivalry, kind of everything we feel like we've lost in college football is what this Saturday is between Texas State and UTSA. So going to be a big game, going to be a fun atmosphere. Jealous of Carter for being there. And, it feels like the Bobcats need to win this one. If they don't win this one, I don't know when they do.
Yeah, Texas State fans, I will be on site at San Marcos. So if you got a tailgating spot, please reach out to me on my Twitter DMs.
So jealous.
Ish, you got to wonder, if not now, then when?
I mean, I've wondered that about 3 times beforehand. So, it's one of those.
You got to wonder again.
Last year wondered that after they beat Baylor. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then Frank Harris was out for like 2 plays and they gave a glimmer of hope. Jeff Traylor's first year thought about that because it was Spavital's second year at that time. So it was like, oh, new roster for UTSA. Of course, that resulted in Texas State missing an extra point that ended up costing them. Obviously, they ended up losing that one. Yeah, I mean, you thought about when it was the first time they played football, when it was, UTSA's in their first season. Maybe they should get, nope, never mind, just happens to be another loss. So you can ask that 20,000 times, and it'll always be like, yeah, you're right, you never know, if not now, when? And it'll just happen the next year and the next year if they end up not winning this one. But Traylor put the nail on the head. This is now a de facto playoff game, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, both teams still have to win out, but this is the game on each of their schedules that you can look back on, let's say, similarly to how Liberty and SMU last year, right? If they played earlier in the season, that decision to put Liberty in is a lot easier, right? Obviously, Liberty ended up losing that game to Oregon, and SMU ended up winning their bowl game, so everybody's like, oh, they should have put SMU. This is that game in week 2. It's because theoretically, obviously, UTSA is one of the favorites in the AAC. Texas State's one of the favorites in the Sun Belt. So all of a sudden, it's like, okay, cool. Now here's the de facto playoff game between 2 G5s who are, if they go on to win their respective conferences, they're going to look back and say, oh, well, one beat the other. Cool, that one goes to the playoff. If if obviously external circumstances like Liberty and all that are eliminated from the conversation. This is by far the biggest stakes that this rivalry has had. Last year, it was a really cool moment, right? After both teams were. Texas State beat Baylor, so there was a lot of hype, 50,000 people in the Alamo Dome, all that stuff, really cool. But you add the stakes of like, okay, now there's a playoff potential.
Yeah, and let's keep it a buck. Sure. The college football powers that be expanded the playoff to 12 teams to get 4 Big 10
sure.
and SEC teams.
Sure.
In. But
there is one.
That group of 5 spot makes this a playoff game and gives it more magnitude than it's ever had before.
Yeah, 100%. And you look at Frank Harris being gone, and for a lot of Texas State fans, that is like the thing.
He's the boogeyman.
I disagree with that being the thing. It is a thing, right? He did have Texas State's number. He was not healthy in that game last year and still managed to come through with a win. But to me, this is a UTSA thing for Texas State. This is a thing that is a mental hurl for Texas State. And whether it's been inherited by G.J. Kinney and this new regime, we'll see. But it's been through past regimes, right? 3 previous head coaching instances, and then of course last year. Look, this goes deeper than just they had a quarterback who we couldn't beat for however many years. This goes to, I've mentioned this before, with Texas State's bugaboo in terms of just like success in general,
yeah,
right?
Generational trauma.
Exactly, generational trauma. But now this is like targeted, right? This is like, okay, that's the guy that gave me some of this trauma. You're looking at the bully in high school being like, that's him right there. Is like 20 years later, it's like, oh, you have your first 6-figure job and all that, but then all of a sudden you see him walking by the street, you're like, there he is. And then all of a sudden you're 8 years old getting stuffed in a locker all over again. So
okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Craven, yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask Craven something. Where do you think Texas State has an advantage over UTSA? I think it's the skill positions, but I also think the Texas State defensive line on the edges with Ben Bell, Tunmise, Adeli. I did not say that right. I just say
Tunmise.
Tunmise. And Stephen Parker.
Michigan State alum. Not alum. Transfer.
Distinguished career. UTSA, they felt great about their offensive line coming in, but they were getting eaten alive by some Kennesaw State defensive stunts in that game, in the first game. Where do you think Texas State can take advantage of UTSA?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting in the interview. You can tell Traylor is trying to shift the focus to Texas State being a clear favorite, right? Like, hey, they got everything going on. They got all these playmakers. Look at that defensive line. G.J. Kinney's a stud. Like we are underdogs for a reason. I feel like that's an interesting way to go about it, considering kind of what these programs have been the last couple of years. But I do think Texas State has better playmakers. Like UTSA doesn't have an Ishmati. UTSA doesn't have a Joey Herbert. And if you go on the other side of the ball, UTSA doesn't have a Ben Bell, right? Like they don't have a Caleb Culp in the backfield, in the secondary. And so I do think Texas State has the player-by-player advantage, at least at the top end of the rosters. I still think UTSA's roster is deeper. Yeah. Like I like number 30 through number 60 on UTSA's roster more than I like number 30 through number 60 on Texas State's roster. And these coaches know each other so well. They know what the other guy wants to do so much that we saw last year kind of got an ugly game, right? It was like, 20-13 or something like that. So it wasn't Frank Harris that beat Texas State last year. It was Texas State's inability to go score points because their offensive line couldn't handle the front seven of UTSA, either in run game or in pass pro. They got into a lot of third down and long situations. So to me, this comes down to a very simple concept here. Which offensive line blocks the other defensive line better, and which team makes the fewer mistakes? Texas State had a lot of penalties last week. Yep. Both teams kind of went into a shell late in the game and kind of let the competition come back to them. I'm not too worried about that. They know the Super Bowl is coming up week 2, and it's just human nature to look forward to. But the team that plays cleaner, that has less mistakes, whether that be penalties or turnovers, and quite frankly, the team that just blocks up the other one is going to win this football game.
Yep. All right, that's all I got, man. I'm very nervous for this game because, like you mentioned, it is over, and it's starting to get to that point where it's like, hey, no matter how good Texas State is, you got to eventually just got to do it, man.
It's a huge week for alma maters.
Did y'all catch what I did, by the way?
Say it again.
Did y'all catch what I did? I moved Texas State above UTSA in the power poll.
Yeah, no, I was very mad about that.
Texas State's favored by 2. They got more talent at the top end of their roster. Just setting this table up for what happens Saturday about 7 p.m. on Twitter if this thing goes the other way.
Narratives over here. You're gonna be like, you're gonna move to UTSA a spot ahead and be like, look at that, the underdog does it again.
The puppeteer. The Grandmaster.
Get in your head.
Anyway, I'm not going to have a great time watching this game at all. All right, that does it for our Spotlight games. Mallory, let's take it to the rapid fire.
All right, y'all. Starting off with the lightning round. Sorry. Number 20, Texas A&M taking on McNeese this Saturday at 11:45 a.m. You can watch it on SEC Network. Craven, I'm going to send this one to you. It kind of just feels like a get-right game for Texas A&M. Maybe kind of figure out what's going on with Connor Wegman, and then maybe figure out what's going on with this offensive line since their starting center is out for the season.
Yeah, this is a Connor Wigman get-right game. I think on paper it looks like one that you should just run the ball down the other team's throat and establish the run game and just dominate. But I think it's a confidence builder for the passing game. The quarterback wasn't very good. I don't think the wide receivers were all that good either. So for A&M, this is a opportunity to build some confidence, build some rhythm, get that passing game going, and then head on to Florida in week 3 with a little bit more confidence.
TCU hosting Long Island this Saturday at 7 p.m. You may remember Long Island from last year because that is one of the only teams that Baylor beat. And you can watch it on ESPN Plus. I said ish. This one's coming to you. What do you want to see from Baylor this week? TCU. Freudian slip.
Because I know. Had the scare last year against them. Look, I want to see more of the same, right? I want to see maybe a little bit more defensive dominance. Obviously, when there was that one drive against Stanford where they just said, hey, just throw it to Iomanor like every play this drive. But outside of that, they did pretty decently against Stanford. So I'm going to say more of the same on offense because I thought the offense was pretty good for the most part. Josh Hoover showed why Sonny Dykes bet the farm on him. But maybe a little more defensive plays. I would like to see that score in the single digits, right? 10 or below 10. We'll see. Obviously, games get late and they get some garbage time points. We'll see. But more of the same from TCU. I liked what I saw against Stanford.
Houston traveling to Norman this Saturday at 6:45, taking on number 16, Oklahoma. Yikes. You can watch it on SEC Network if you're an Oklahoma fan. Houston, don't even worry about it. Oklahoma coming into this game as 29.5-point favorites. The over-under 52.5. Carter, can we see anything from Houston? Is it time to hit the panic button? Is the season over? What's up with Houston?
I have smashed the panic button on Houston right now. Going into this Oklahoma game, I just want to see some downfield passing. I believe at one point Donovan Smith was 5 of 7 for 16 yards. I want to see Latrell McCutcheon revenge game. at Houston, maybe. So the cornerback who used to play at Oklahoma, he's not going to be able to do it himself. Hunker down.
Hunker down. I love it. North Texas hosting SFA this Saturday at 6:30 p.m. You can watch it on ESPN+. I'll actually take this one because I will be there at this game. I'm going to give this one to myself. Liked what I saw from the offense. Obviously, Chandler Morris last week. I'd like to see maybe more of an identity in the run game. Let's figure out what the heck North Texas is doing on defense, because next week you're going into play a team in Texas Tech that is very, very pointsy and will put up points on you. So let's figure out what they're doing on defense, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Rice hosting Texas Southern this Saturday at 6 p.m. You can watch it on ESPN+. Craven, is this a get-right game for Rice?
It better be. They need this one, just to get that sour taste out of last week. I went back and rewatched that game on Sunday because I'm a psychopath. Once it was past the first quarter, it was a pretty even game, right? I think more of week one between Sam Houston and Rice was about Sam Houston's improvement than Rice's step backwards. They were down 17-0 before they really got into the game. So to me, this is an Owls get-right game. Dean Connors has a big game. Defense gets it going. We'll see what they are in week 3.
Sam Houston traveling to play UCF this Saturday at 5:30 p.m. You can watch it on ESPN+. UCF coming in as 21-point favorites. The over-under 58.5-ish. Is this, hey, enjoy your win by Rice for Sam Houston. Maybe show a little bit what you got on offense with Skylar Cassidy leading there. But, hey, is it a just stay healthy for Sam Houston?
I mean, I'll give them a little bit more respect than that. I think UCF did look really good in their first game. Don't get me wrong. But I will give this defense for Sam a little bit more credit. I think they'll be able to make an interesting game for a period, right? I do think eventually UCF's run game is going to absolutely just roll in this. This is what Gus Malzahn wants to do. It's what KJ Jefferson loves to do. Yes, third, fourth quarter, as we've talked about, the bodies will start to wear down, things like that. But I want this to be a close game after one. Right, if this is within a touchdown, if this is tied, if Sam Houston maybe has a lead at the end of the first quarter, I think that's something that's within their realm of possibility, within their realm of playability. I liked what I saw from Hunter Watson. Let's just keep the good things going. I think good vibes can come from this game regardless of whether or not they lose.
All right, Carter, round us out. UTEP hosting Southern Utah this Saturday at 8 p.m. You can watch it on ESPN+. Is this a get-right game for UTEP?
UTEP, you better get your picks up because it's a must-win, not a get-right game.
This is a must-win, absolutely.
FCS Southern Utah right now is... Look, Scotty Walden comes from the FCS ranks. He's not overlooking Southern Utah at all. But in the home opener, after this, you got Liberty, who's the conference favorite, Colorado State, Sam Houston. If you don't win this game, I can't see the next win for another couple weeks now. So must-win stamp right now.
There you go.
And that rounds out the Week 2 slate for all of you viewers. I'll go ahead and throw up the Week 2 slate graphic. If you want to see more of this, you can, I believe it's going to be posted on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
Yes,
so if this is not enough time for you to see this, you can absolutely find this on our pages. But really fun Week 2 slate. I'm really jealous I'm not at the big house with you, Craven, watching that game. It'll be fun for sure.